I've never seen this vmix call thing before. This is kind of
All right. I'm going to just mute you real quick.
cool.
All right, good Wednesday evening, Mid-Michigan. Chief Meteorologist Chris Easlick coming to you with our latest update for tonight. But tonight, instead of talking about our weather pattern, that's going to be pretty boring, I would say, considering what we went through over the weekend with some lake effect snow and then some lake effect snow on Monday as well. But I figured this time around we would invite a special guest because it is Edmund Fitzgerald week, and somebody who I think is interested in the Edmund Fitzgerald as I am would be former TV5 meteorologist Kyle Gillette, and I will put him up on the screen now. Kyle, thank you for joining us tonight. Let's test your mic out first. Can you say something for us? All right, I believe.
You got me?
Yes, I believe everybody can hear you. So, first, number one, it is great to have you. Thanks for carving out some time in the schedule for me. Because you've been a busy guy when it comes to your graduate studies. So just while I get everything organized on my end, feel free to tell us kind of what you've been up to, what you're willing to share.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to anybody that'll listen, right, about stuff, especially like the Emma Fitzgerald. But yeah, so what I've been up to recently, first, it's a pleasure to be able to chat with the folks of Mid Michigan again. So if you're still, following my Facebook page, you've probably seen pictures from all over the place in the last about a year now. So for the last year, I've been attending the University of North Dakota to get my master's degree in atmospheric science. And so what I do right now is I research severe convective storms. In particular, I am trying to investigate the impact of two storms interacting with each other on one of the storms' ability to produce tornadoes. And so that's what I'm doing right now is I'm pursuing my master's and, of course, still all over the place, hunting down the night sky. So this was, thanks for pulling it up, Chris. That was some aurora from last night, and we might have a little bit of that again tonight as well. So it's been pretty active in the last just couple of days for us as far as the night sky is concerned. And then even, going into the last few days, the Evan Fitzgerald stuff. And then I had a bunch of thesis work I had to have done in the last week. So it's definitely been a busy last couple of weeks here for us, Chris. And of course, going throughout November, more of these shipwreck stories too.
Yeah, so I kind of caught you on the best week possible because I know you've laughed with me a couple of times. I'll send you a text about we actually were lucky enough to get a copy of a new Fitzgerald book that was coming out. Mm-hmm. And I laugh every time because you said, gosh, I'm just now seeing this text. So I know how busy you are. So it's no big deal at all. But let's go over, I'll pull up the Fitzgerald map here and we can just talk over it. This is the path that was taken by not only the Edmund Fitzgerald, but also the Arthur M. Anderson. I think anyone who has even a little bit of interest in the Fitzgerald at this point is fairly familiar with not only the Fitzgerald itself, but also the Anderson that followed it. While we have this map up, I asked Rick Mixter the same thing. Him, and I have talked so many times, it seems like over the years. And I asked him the same question when I interviewed him was, what is it, you are like him, where you have, I'm more of a Fitzgerald guy, but you two have
Mhm.
kind of sparked an interest in everything else that has happened. But what
Mhm.
is it about the Fitzgerald that gets kind of you coming back for more? What sparked that interest for you?
Yeah, well, I think like a lot of folks, the first instance, because I grew up in Michigan, but not necessarily near the lakes. It was more in the middle. But of course, you grow up in Michigan. There's Great Lakes around you, and it's part of our culture, even if you're not necessarily on the lake. So you kind of know there's shipwrecks and stuff. But your first real exposure to it is, for most folks, is Gordon Lightfoot's The Wreck of the Emma Fitzgerald. So I remember listening to that for, oh gosh, I don't know how old I was, but it's been my favorite song for a long time. And I think kind of same thing was with Weather. I look into it one time, and then I explode down this rabbit hole of interest. And yeah, so for the Fitzgerald, I think that the thing that really captures everybody's attention is just the fact that beyond the song, into the '70s, this wasn't supposed to happen anymore. And the Fitzgerald, when it was launched, it was the biggest ship that we had at the time it was launched. And so, even though that wasn't the case at the time it sunk, it was a very large ship, and it just wasn't supposed to happen anymore. And what we also hadn't had in a while was a ship that completely vanished, and we didn't know where it was for a couple of days until they were able to find it. So it was just the fact that you have television and radio at the time. So people are seeing it on their nightly news that a ship and almost 30 people are now lost, and we don't find them for several days. And then the song comes out. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, but it really is just the mystery. I think that's the other big part about this shipwreck, is that there's so much mystery. We don't really know what happened. We probably never will, and that also feeds into the interest, especially for this particular shipwreck.
Yeah, and that was also one of the questions that I asked Rick when we interviewed, is because you remember when I put my story together, even before the pandemic, we had
Mm-hmm.
just the meteorological look at it,
Yep.
and I was still, as much as I had an interest in it, is I was still fairly new to more of the, I told Rick, kind of the underneath the Wikipedia level stuff. So I was starting to get more into the Weather Service and some of their live tweeting, and then you do your live Facebook posts every year during this event. And I asked him, because back in, I think it was 2019 when we did our last interview, is he told me that there's no consensus from what happened to this boat. And right or wrong, whatever it might be, is everybody has their opinion on it. And
Hmm.
I say this more so for a lack of better term, but there are some very stubborn opinions on what happened to it. So
Yes, there are.
I would say, you know, Rick was fairly open of his opinion, but also said, I'm not 100% on everything, and I'm sure you probably feel the same way. So,
Mhm.
do you find that there's maybe a better consensus now, or do you still think there's a lot of conflict? Or maybe we're starting to work towards something? What do you think on that?
Yeah, this is actually really funny because I added a new post in the series of Fitzgerald stuff this year that I haven't done in years past, and that was uh, the first like 35, 40 posts in this sequence. It's all fact. It's all things that are known and written about throughout the years by many different people and in many different reports. And then the last one I did on the Fitzgerald just the other day was my opinion on what I think happened. And I'm not a shipwreck expert in the sense that Rick is. Rick is way on a different level. So when it comes to what I think happened, I am just forming an opinion based on the consensus of things that I've read in different texts and different reports. But when I made this post talking about what I think was the most likely to happen based on the facts that I understand to be true, there were a ton of different theories that had been added in the comments, and some of them were very interesting to read. And a lot of times you question, does this person actually know anything about Great Lakes shipping, or are they just spewing things that they've seen on Facebook? Or it's funny, there's a lot of folks that also base a lot of their uh, their opinions on the song, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Gordon Lightfoot actually did a tremendous job of trying to keep the song very factual, but of course, there's a lot more than what you can fit in. Even his, what is it, 5 minute, 7 minute song or whatever it
Hmm.
is. But um, yeah, I think that there's always going to be kind of the stubborn back and forth. One thing that I do think is really starting to change is when the Coast Guard report came out, and like really early on, there was a lot of talk on it being there's hatch clamps that go onto the big metal hatches that go over the cargo holds, and a lot of the early thought was that the blame was on the crew members for not putting the hatch clamps down all the way, or some of them may have been missing or put on incorrectly. I think a lot of the consensus has moved away from that, in that it was probably something due to stress on the ship in some way, running aground, some other factor that necessarily wasn't on the crew. I know that a lot of the maritime industry, a lot of mariners fought back against those initial suggestions that there was something related to just improper use or of the clamps and some other things that would be on the crew, so to speak. But um, I think that's probably the only thing we're finding consensus on. Pretty much everybody else is still, they have their own opinion on things, and it probably will always be that way, because I personally don't think we're ever going to go back down there to do any dives, at least in the way things seem to be now. So I think what we know for now is what we're probably going to know for a while.
Yeah, it's certainly something that I think is going to be interesting as technology continues to get better. Are we going to eventually go back? I know there are some opinions on that from the family members
Mhm.
that are, please just let everyone rest in peace
Yep.
and
Yep.
leave it alone. But then there's also that educational aspect of it, and then just the general interest as a whole to that. And I actually listened to what I'm still learning on some of this, and it's a podcast you might be familiar with, but it's called Weather Brains.
Mhm.
And James Spann and many others in the weather community are on that podcast. And I was listening to that on the way in to just kind of see if I could pick anything up for our conversation. And one of the things that I never really knew was apparently there's a story of, I think, and I may be incorrect, but I believe it was the daughter of who the ship was named after, Edmund Fitzgerald, who, from what I understand, didn't have much to do himself with the shipping industry, but I believe was
Mhm.
involved with Northwest Mutual of Milwaukee. And I
Yep.
believe it was his daughter who was there to christen the ship. And there's a lot of folklore, of course, around ships. And I believe one of the
Yep.
traditions was to break a glass of champagne. Well, then it took 3 tries to break the glass of champagne. That's something I never
Mhm.
knew with that event. And
Yep.
yeah, even listening to the podcast, it seemed like there was a variety of different opinions. But one thing that seems to be pointed out was, okay, well, Gordon Lightfoot wrote the song, and there are a lot of aspects of that song that are incorrect based on facts. But I
Mhm.
also heard the interpretation on that podcast as well that his song was meant more to be sort of a story of the entire Great Lakes shipping, not just the Fitzgerald itself. And that's something that I thought was pretty interesting too.
Yeah, my understanding of the song is that um, it was either the night that it happened he heard about it, or within the next few days he heard about it, and this might be partially incorrect. This is in one of the books that I use as a source, and I haven't read this particular part in a while, but something to the effect of, shortly after it happened, Gordon had um, uh, he had heard about it, and it really touched him, and I think it was in the time span that they hadn't found anybody yet, so, or where the ship was at. And so uh, my understanding is that he locked himself in a room for like 3 days straight and had nothing but some kind of alcohol and coffee while he was writing some of the lyrics of the song, and he didn't come out of the room until he had it right. And at the time it was using facts that were quote unquote known at the time, and this would have been shortly afterwards, because it was published, I believe, May of 1976, so not even
Yep.
a full year
I was going to
after
say
the fact.
76 is what I was fairly certain.
Yes, yeah. So it's pretty quick turnaround relative to like when all the other reports and surveys and stuff came out. But in later years, I think it was the 1988 version, I believe. After some other reports and stuff came out, some lyrics were changed and corrected. Of course, there's still things about it that are technically not true or considered to not be true. Like at 7 p.m., the main hatchway gave in. We don't really know if that's the case, right? There's a lot of other things, but it really still is a story of this industry as a whole, right? Because there's, you know, 30,000 mariners have been lost. There's over 6,000 shipwrecks estimated on the Great Lakes, and so it's not just the Fitzgerald, but I think the best way to put it is that the wreck of the Emmett Fitzgerald song by Gordon Lightfoot is a no pun intended, a vessel to sing or tell a story about the industry as a whole, and doing that through the events of the record.
Yeah, and I suppose that's not really much different than, say, you and I learning something now in weather
Mm-hmm.
that they didn't have the technology to figure out back then. And of course,
Exactly.
one of the things that I pulled up here, and I'll see if I can get it full screen for everyone to see. I know it's going to be tough because we can only make this image so large, is this is on the National Weather Service Marquette page. And there are a variety of different simulations that we have done with modern weather forecast models. And a lot of those forecast models have given us images like this. And I'll use the modeled winds first, and we should be able to see this at least fairly well. But one of the things that always stood out to me when I was originally researching this event, I believe I did one of the articles for the TV5 website, and this was right after I started. I think this was back in 2016. And being new to the business, I just wrote this article because I found it fascinating. But it actually, it was an article that went on our TV5 Facebook page it almost went viral. And I thought, well, man, there must be more interest to this than I thought. And then over the years, I started to learn about this. But every time I came back, it seemed like the biggest conclusion that there was about a 6-hour period where if the Fitzgerald came through the point where she went down, if it was 6 hours earlier or if it was 6 hours later, that she would have been fine. But it was a very big case of wrong place at wrong time. And if you look at this map here, this is a modeled simulation of 7 o'clock on November 10th, the night she went down. And one of the things, if you aren't familiar with how waves form, is we are looking for what we call fetch, which is a distance across the lake. It allows those waves to build momentum, and you can see with those northwesterly winds, there is no shortage of distance over Lake Superior where those waves had the potential to build. And of course, you have a strong wind that goes along with that, and you sort of find the X marks the spot here where she went down was in some of the highest winds that we had. This is the 50-meter wind speed translated to knots. And so I believe, if I'm doing my calculations correctly, give or take, that's about 60 miles per hour. And so 60 miles per hour sustained. These are not gusts. These are sustained winds at nearly 60 miles per hour. You're 14 miles per hour off from a Category 1 hurricane. And so that gives you a sense as to how strong the winds were. And then also, if I can pull up this map right here, you combine the wind speeds with some of those models in the distance across the lake, and you can get some simulations with how big the waves may have been. And these are in meters. And right on the outside, you see this little outline that says about 7.2, and the X is blocking where that last little contour is, but I believe that's something roughly about 7.5. And so if you take, 3 meters per every foot, give or take, 3 feet for every 1 meter, you get roughly about 25 to 30 feet with the waves. And so that's only what we call the significant wave height. And the significant wave height is if you take all of the waves over a certain time period, and if you were able to measure every single one, You take the top third highest waves out of that entire time period, and then you average them together and you get that significant wave height. So the significant wave height here was about 25 to 30 feet, give or take. And on the website for the National Weather Service in Marquette, they have a note that says rogue waves can be as much as 2 times the height of the significant wave height. So we're talking about a wave, let's even be conservative and say it was 25 feet. You could get a rogue wave that's approaching 40 to 50 feet. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's you put it the right way. It is just the wrong place at the wrong time. One thing is, the Anderson was right behind the Fitzgerald by only an hour or so. So more or less in the same conditions, at least to some degree, it was in the same conditions for some time. So that speaks to one fact that there was something going wrong with the Fitzgerald to cause the Fitzgerald to actually, um, for whatever reason, or in some way or some fashion, get caught up in those heavy seas where the Anderson was able to make it through. But another important fact here, you want to think about this kind of in a relative sense, right? You are constantly being hit by these waves, and then you get some of those higher waves that are 20, maybe 30 feet, and then maybe the tallest possible waves out there are getting up to that 40, maybe 50-foot range. um, it's more than likely that at this time the Fitzgerald was sitting only about 12 to 13 feet above the water line, right? So if you take a 12 to 13 foot clearance above the water, and then you add that significant wave height on top of that, so then we can kind of see maybe how high over the top of the deck were these waves, and you're still talking 15 feet or more above the top of the deck, and that's covering a lot of the ship. And this is actually confirmed by Captain Cooper of the Anderson. In the 90s, he had an interview where he said that he had his I believe he said it was his hatch crane, I believe, was completely covered in water a few times shortly before the Fitzgerald went down. And that would be at 12 to 15 feet above the deck. So that is incredibly powerful. And the thing is, like, if you go all the way back to when the Fitzgerald was in Wisconsin, you are, trying to get the weather forecast, trying to figure out what to do. And at the time, we don't have information like this. We just know that the stronger the wind is, the bigger the waves are, especially if that strong wind is over the lake for a long time. But we don't know specifics about location or direction or strength back at this point in the 70s. So the Fitzgerald tried to do the best that it could, the two captains, with the information that they had, and it just ended up being a case of wrong place, wrong time, where the decisions they made didn't necessarily work out. In the case of the Anderson, they did. In the case of the Fitzgerald, something else must have been wrong with the ship at the time for it to not make it through. And if you're already dealing with some problems, those are incredibly rough seas to deal with. And the other thing I'll add to this is, on the ocean you can get waves a lot bigger than that. But the
Yeah.
problem with waves on the ocean, or maybe the good thing about waves on the ocean, is that they're very spread apart. So you would say that they have a low frequency. So the amount of waves that pass one point, it takes a long time for the next wave to come up, and that's because the ocean's very deep. So the frequency, or the amount of times the one location is hit by a wave over and over again is dependent on the depth of the water body. So even though Lake Superior is very deep, as deep as Great Lake, it's still much shallower than some of our oceans. So especially when you get into kind of close to the Whitefish Bay area. Uh, in fact, the Fitzgerald is taller end to end than the water that it sank in. Right, it was only
Hmm.
500 feet of water. So what that means is the shallower the water body is, the more frequent those waves are. So they could be as tall as ocean waves, or maybe a little shorter than ocean waves, but they come so much faster over the location of the ship, that if you get caught in a wave, you're trying to ride it up before you can come back down, you're already being hit with another wave. So it makes it incredibly difficult to recover, especially if you have some other kind of issue, if you're taking on water listing or whatnot, and then waves of that size. The fact that they were able to do this study to confirm, or at least support evidence that we had waves of that height is a big deal, because it really does prove that uh, weather was indeed a significant factor in this event.
Yeah, and I guess that's something I never really thought of over the years. Is the Fitz was what 700 something, feet long, and
Hmm.
I've never put that together. For as much as I've read about this, and as much as I've looked at this, I've never thought, well, if it's 500 feet down, if you stood it up, it would be taller. I've never
Yeah,
put that together, but that just shows you the more you talk about this, the more you
yeah.
learn about this. What is, I would say we can kind of at least wrap up the Fitz discussion because I do have a 10 o'clock newscast I have to prepare for. I would love to do 3 hours on this.
Well, of course.
And the Northern Lights are out tonight, so I have to let you go
Mhm.
at some point. But what is something that maybe now about the Fitz that you don't think is common knowledge? What is something that, again, goes deeper than maybe the Wikipedia level that other people would be surprised to hear?
Oh man.
And if you don't have
Um,
anything, that's okay. But I figured
no,
we'd put it out there.
yeah. My the number one thing I'd say is that there's certainly more to the story than we will ever know. And there is always something every year that comes around, I find some other little nugget of information that adds complexity to the story, that really makes this that much more complicated to find the answer to. So when it comes to like what you think happened or didn't happen or whatnot, there's always little nuggets of information that add to that. And frankly, the thing about how tall the Fitzgerald is relative to the water, I think that's actually really important because my theory is, and I've actually talked to some historians at Central Michigan University about this. The theory, at least that I have, is that as the Fitzgerald came in contact with a wave, it was tilted down towards the lake bottom, and then it was unable to recover when it was hit with another wave, so it was forced to nosedive. And a lot of people's arguments against that is that there would have been a bigger impact on the front, probably in the hull on the bow, and then when you look at some of the schematics of the underwater footage and stuff from the Coast Guard, you don't really see that. But if the Fitzgerald is taller in the water, like standing on end like this, than the water is, right, it won't actually nosedive that fast. A lot of people probably think that it's going to nosedive really fast down to the bottom and make this big crater or something. But it's kind of like, if you stand in a pool, right, and you're 6 foot tall in a 4 foot pool, when you go down to the bottom, you actually don't go down that fast because there's not a lot of space between the top of the water and the bottom. So my opinion is that because it's not in that deep of water relative to the size of the ship, and likely, you remember, the wave gets high and the wave also gets low. So even though the water is 500 something feet, if you add in a 30 or 40 foot wave, you might actually be pulling that down maybe to 400 feet or so. So I think that, at least in my opinion, the shearing off of the back side and all those other things that happened as it was going down to the bottom. Um, the Daniel J. Morrell in the 60s, that's a case where it broke apart on top of the water. The bow went under and the stern was still under power and kept going for quite some time. That's off the coast of the Thumb. We didn't see that in the Fitzgerald. The two pieces are laying right next to each other. So I think a combination of what other history tells us and how the depth of the water, I think that's important. Other than that, there's always some other nugget of information that provides some other aspect of the story that's important. So if you're someone that's interested by this, or if you have an interest in this type of thing, just read everything you can because everybody's got different theories and different ideas. It's always really interesting to hear what other people say.
Yeah. So if you can see me through your computer,
Mhm.
is it almost like I was because this is one of the posts that I saw on your Facebook page is when you were talking about how the ship came through the wave. So it came through the
Mhm.
wave, and was it almost like the other wave came in and just forced it like that almost, where it came down and then kind of forced it to go vertical in a sense?
Yeah, yeah, that's what my opinion is. If you've ever seen a video of even in a movie, like a ship on the ocean or Deadliest Catch or something, right? They go way up those
Yep.
waves and then they come back down. But if those waves are hitting you really really fast, unlike on the ocean, if you get caught tilt like this and another wave comes down on top of you, And in the case of the Fitzgerald, if it has a list or it's taking on water or if something's wrong with it, it's going to be unable to recover and it might just go right down. And in fact, it might not even necessarily be that something was that wrong with the Fitzgerald, even though we know that there was something wrong.
Mhm.
But it might just be the fact that the Anderson got lucky and didn't have that specific orientation relative to the wave that caused it to go. We
Yeah.
don't know, but um, yeah, I think it was the succession of waves. A lot of people like to call that the Three Sisters idea. I don't really think it's a Three Sisters thing, but I do think that it probably got caught on some vertical kind of deal like this, and then as another wave came down on top of it, it just couldn't recover.
Yeah, it almost is like, to put it very simply, it's almost like when we are looking at severe weather reports,
Mhm.
you've got one area, like let's just use a random place in mid Michigan. You've got, say downtown Saginaw versus Saginaw Township. You might
Mhm.
have, you know, dime-sized hail and 60-mile-per-hour winds in downtown Saginaw. You get out to Saginaw Township, which is not a very big distance, and you can have a variety of changes just in that
Mhm.
short distance. And perhaps that could be, it's probably oversimplifying it to a point, but the Anderson may have just been in a slightly better position and
Yes.
avoided those waves. Or if there's a heavy lake effect snow band, which is what we saw this past weekend, is you get a place like Freeland, which gets slammed with about 4 to 6 inches of snow in a very short period of time. And then you drive into portions of, I'm just trying to think of the reports off the top of my head, into portions of Bay County where people are telling you, what snow are you
Yeah.
talking about? We hardly picked
Yeah.
up anything in my town. So that kind of makes sense to me when you think about it that way. So, really cool stuff. We could talk for hours. Let's just pull this up while we have it. And we did this briefly, but I'll pull it back up. As this is your Facebook page. You used to
Mhm.
be meteorologist Kyle Gillette, but now that you have gone to the other side, your Facebook page is now Kyle Gillette Photography. If anybody
Mhm.
wants to follow your page. And I have that tagged on my page as well, for anyone who can't necessarily find it in the search. Facebook can be kind of complicated sometimes, but this is
Yeah.
something that you captured last night. And
Yep.
just by your post, you said not only are you a Northern Lights fanatic already, but last night's show was just incredible. And
Yeah.
the fact that you were able to just catch this right up above was awesome.
Yeah. Last night, I'm so sad that Michigan had cloud cover last night. I have a friend in the northern Lower Peninsula. He was able to go outside, and the clouds were thin enough to actually be glowing, kind of this shade of green and red. But last night it helps to be at my latitude. I'm an hour from the Canadian border, essentially up here in North Dakota, so that makes it really easy to do this. But yeah, I was on the way out of town yesterday, and I looked up and I was like, "Oh my gosh, is that a cloud?" No, it was already the lights of the aurora. So yeah, last night was great. We might be able to do it again here tonight. I think Michigan. I mean, this is I'll say you're on the clock right now, Chris. So I
Yeah.
guess you have to tell me if I'm right
I've
or
got
wrong.
some reports. I did make a post. I've got my Facebook page up. Did get a couple of photos. This one was
Okay,
really
good.
faint at MBS. You can see some of the pinks up
Yep.
over the
Yep.
top layer of the cloud. The one thing that's going to be tough for those who are looking out in mid Michigan tonight, if I can pull up quickly the Goes East satellite here, and I can pull up the Great Lakes region with the geocolor, we should be able to tell. And it's a pretty good divide over the area
Oof.
right now. Is where if
Yeah.
you're in a place like Isabella County and to the south, or if you're generally southwest of the bay. Oh, that's not good. Hopefully we're coming back here. There we go. Good old HDMI cable. But if you're generally southwest of the bay, you're in pretty good shape tonight, and that's where I seem to be getting most of the pictures. So that one was at MBS. Let's just take, this is Lake Isabella. That's
Oh,
really
there you
nice.
go. Yeah.
Lake Isabella, we've got Big Rapids. Really awesome
There
one
we go.
there.
Yeah, that looks like a lot of the pictures I've seen so far tonight. So very
Yep,
cool.
so we're getting lucky tonight. Let's see, Wheeler.
Nice.
That was about 8:20.
Yeah, so I'll add here the trick is, just make sure you're not in under cloud cover first of all, and then get away from city lights, look north. Last night, actually, of course, being as far north as I am, it's a little different, but I did not look north at all. I had to look completely south or straight above. It was completely black sky to my north, so the aurora was all south of me last night. But in general, in Michigan, all you got to do is get away from the city lights, look north, and generally
Yeah, so
you'll be okay. But
Jason is clouded up in Oscoda, unfortunately. We've got some as far south as Dowling, Michigan, which is, I believe, Berry County. Breckenridge, Kevin sent this one in at about 9 o'clock. We've got some
oh yeah, very good.
good green off in the distance there. We've got a good one from Midland.
Oh yeah, nice. I mean,
Some
that looks like it's closer to town-ish too.
Yeah. And I
That's
would
pretty good.
say, maybe you remember, I almost want to say this is Freeland right here, and I can just talk over some of these images, which is also, you've got street lights, it looks
Yeah,
like, on the
that's pretty good.
left-hand side. So the fact that you're still seeing them as vibrant as that is pretty cool. And this one's Midland and Lee Township, a little bit away from city lights, it looks like. Beautiful shot there. But
Hmm.
I want to say it might have been a weekend in March or something that I was filling in for you. It was during March Madness. And we weren't going on until midnight because of the basketball games. And the
Hmm.
basketball game that was on at the time was clearly going long. Like it only had an hour left to go, and we were only, I think, at the beginning of the first or the second half. And so I remember we were in our 10 o'clock newscast at the time, and I told our producer,
Oh
hey,
yes, I remember this.
let me run out to Bay City State Park really quick. I said,
Yep.
we've already done the full weather forecast. Let's put a quick package in there for the National. I'm going to go out because we're not getting on until midnight. I'm going to see what I can capture for the newscast that went on late. And that was my first experience that night. I had seen the Northern Lights. I had not seen
Wow.
them with the raw eye. I had
Wow.
not seen them dance overhead. And this was also, I think you've probably been to Bay City State Park before, but it was that right as you're going into the park where that ice cream shop and mini golf place
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yep.
Forgive me, Bay City residents, for not remembering the name. I've driven past there so many times and I can't think of it off the top of my head. But I remember looking up, and there was a street light there. This is at 11 o'clock
Yeah.
at night, so there's nothing else around, but it was that bright orange street light. And I pulled off because I'm like, even under that street light, I can still see
Oh yeah.
these lights dancing above. And then just the pictures that I got were some of the most incredible that I'd ever seen. Here's another one tonight. I didn't get a location on this, but
Yeah, that was March 23rd, 2023. I was in Iowa for a conference.
that's right. It was the Severe Storms and Doppler Radar Conference. I remember that. So yeah, pretty cool. And then anything else? The last question we'll give to you before we let you go.
Yeah.
What is something in North Dakota that you expected it to be cold when you went out there? You expected probably your fair share of snow. Has anything caught you off guard that says, "Wow, I thought I could handle this, and this is intense"?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I'm a general enjoyer of all weather and any weather.
Yeah.
I don't like a lot of heat, so I'm glad I'm up here because it's generally nice and cool. I think I don't want it to be this way all the time, but I do find it a little enjoyable when it's minus 55 wind chill for a couple days, just because it's cool to say that it's minus 55. But um, the cold is about what I expected. The one thing that's very different between here and Michigan, which is intuitive, but you don't really realize or think about it until you experience it. But we don't get a lot of like really big snows here. It's a lot of little snows. So in Michigan, you might get that 1 inch of snow, kind of like this lake effect event you guys just had. A couple days later, it's going to melt, right? And it's going to be gone, and then you're going to keep going through this cycle, over and over again. In North Dakota, you get 1 inch. It's going to be on the ground the
Yeah.
entire winter, and that's essentially what it's like here. So we end up with these like we'll have 10 of these like little 1 inch half-inch events where we just get a quick system that moves through, but the snow is on the ground the entire time. And when it's really really cold, there's no salt up here. They tried beet juice, that doesn't work either, so the roads are just kind of constantly ice, and you just kind of learn to learn to live with it and drive your car better. But yeah, that's kind of been the craziest part is that in Michigan you're like, okay, it snowed, but I know the grass is going to be brown in a couple days. But in here
Yeah.
it snows just that little bit and it'll
Yeah.
stay there and just
Well,
slowly
you
adds up.
probably you probably don't miss this, but you know how complicated those November snows are here in Michigan
Yeah.
because, a couple of people have asked because this was one of those events that was kind of a communication nightmare, is because
Hmm.
leading up to the event all week, it was fairly clear we were going to get snow. And
Yeah.
it was also fairly clear that we were going to get some lake effects behind it. The
Hmm.
problem with that is the lake effects. We usually don't get the specifics of those really fine conditions until right up to the end. And so we can say that
Enjoy.
there's lake effects, all week long, but we truly don't know the magnitude until we actually get a little bit closer.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, this time around, is we got a lot of that information going into a weekend when everybody is a little bit busier. There's not that routine of talking
Yeah.
about the forecast on a nightly basis. And so it was an event, I think, in a sense that kind of caught people off guard a little bit, is because all of a sudden you're talking about, okay, well, we've got this event coming later in the week. We've got soil temperatures in the 40s, which no doubt is a factor. But
Hmm.
then you also have to account for, well, if the snow does come down heavy enough, you are going to get some accumulation. So there's a bit of let's see what happens with that. But then all of a sudden, you've got just, I remember Friday night starting to get the signal of some of the heavier lake effect snow. And I think that the highest total that we got on Sunday was about 6 inches in Freeland, but it was a
Oh,
very narrow,
yeah.
at least based on the reports that we've gotten. It was a very narrow band that was right northeasterly. It was similar to that one you and I looked up that one time where
Yes.
downtown,
Yeah.
I think it was 2016,
Yep.
where downtown Saginaw just got buried, and then you could go out to Fashion Square Mall and there was hardly anything.
Yep.
But it seemed like a scenario almost like that, where there was just enough of a funneling effect right down the Saginaw Bay. And then we flipped around on Monday, and places like Ubley and Bad Axe. I mean, I'm sure you remember the northerly lake effect that can
Yeah.
happen in the thumb. So it wasn't necessarily, I would say, a surprise to anybody who's lived here this long. But I'm sure you don't miss the complication of warm ground snow forecasts and
Yeah.
also
That is
the
tough.
lake effects. So
Yeah. Combine the first cold blast when the air temperature is clearly cold enough, but you've still
yeah,
been 60 for the past 3 weeks plus, and yeah, so that's difficult. We actually get a little bit of lake effect off of Lake Manitoba and Lake Winnipeg here when we have due north winds and the lakes up there haven't frozen over yet. We just last weekend or the weekend before we had some lake effect here, so didn't expect to get that, but yeah, the snow forecasting is definitely less complicated here than it is in Michigan. The one complicating factor we do have is, just like in Michigan, the snow comes down, hits the warm ground, and melts, so you don't really know how much actually fell. Here, the snow hits the ground, and we also have 40-mile-an-hour winds all day, every day, so that wind is just blowing the snow away.
yep,
A lot of people think of blizzards in North Dakota. It's true, a lot of blizzards here, but the blizzards aren't necessarily from falling snow. It's from the wind picking up snow that's already
yep.
on the ground and causing those whiteout conditions. We see a little bit of that in the thumb from time to time when we get those big wind events. But um, yeah, it's definitely different complications, but
Yep.
ground temperatures are my least favorite. So I'm glad that it's not as
Yeah.
complicated up here as it
And
is.
there is a bit of a trade off, as I've explained this to somebody before. They say, well, is snow forecasting easier out in the plains because you've got more of a flat surface there? You don't have the lakes around you. And I said, well, to a point, it can be. But what we talk about all the time is when you get storm systems that we expect, 4 or 5 days out in time, with those weather balloon observations,
Mhm.
oftentimes we wait for what we call sampling, when we can get that weather balloon information in places like Washington and even into Oregon, where we get the actual data from the storm. Now, it's
Mhm.
less complicated from a meteorological standpoint to a point. It's still
Yep.
complicated. If it were
Yep.
easy, life would be a lot easier. But
Yeah.
the trade-off is you get almost one less day of information
Yep.
that you're starting to build towards a consensus. Whereas in
Yeah.
Michigan, we might have maybe more of a complicated setup, but we also get one extra day to kind of sort through that. So there's a bit
Yeah.
of give and take. So everyone says, well, what's the hardest place to forecast in the country? I get that question a lot. And I said, well, everywhere.
Yeah. 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 And the other thing is too, like being closer to the mountains here, we have less time between when the system comes off the mountains onto the plains, where we can kind of let models and observations figure out what the system's going to look like before it gets to us. Where, in Michigan, you have the whole width of the plains to see how the system evolves. So, yeah, different complications, and it's a good learning experience to go back and forth between different places and experience what those complications are. But it's all fun, that's for sure.
For sure. All right, man. Well, I'm going to forget that we have a 10 o'clock newscast here if I don't get off of this, but you're the man. Thanks for making time for me. I'm sure there are some in mid-Michigan, whether they could watch live with us tonight or whether they'll go back and watch later. I'm sure they're happy to see you. I know we're all very happy with your success out there. And the joke I've seen on the comments a couple of times is we're going to get papers from Dr. Gillette someday. So we
Very
look
good.
we
I
look
appreciate
forward we look forward to that. So we'll let you go, man. We'll do this again when there's cool weather to talk about, because I'll be
We
doing one of
definitely
these streams every night. Now that we've tested out the video, it's pretty easy to get through. So Kyle Gillette, everybody, we wish him well, and we'll talk to you soon, buddy.
I appreciate you, Chris. Yeah, we'll definitely do this again. Thank you.
All right, see you, man.
See you guys.